Hi everyone, it's Michael Hunt here with Tim Foskett, our Director of Ministries. We're here at Revesby Congregational Church after a bit of a break from doing our podcasts. And I've invited Tim here today because in a previous episode, Tim asked me some questions about my background and my role as President of the FCC. And I want to ask Tim some questions about his background, his involvement with congregational churches. So Tim, welcome here to Revesby today. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Michael. I feel like a bit of a celebrity here. Special place, orange backdrop, apricot backdrop, Revesby Con, the lights are on, the cameras. I feel like a special person.
And we've got the whole production broadcast studio sort of happening here, haven't we?
Yeah, it's cool. I feel very trendy. Got my nice jacket on.
Now, if there's some school noise and also some road noise, we do apologise. We've just timed the recording of this. We might even have a breakout song, I think, from the kids. We'll wait and see what sort of happens there.
For sure.
Look, we do want to apologise for the bit of a pause and break, but there's been some big things that have been sort of happening in our lives, and particularly your life, Tim.
Yeah.
This last few months, a big change has happened personally.
Yeah. So you want me to say what it is?
Yeah. I know.
I think most people probably know, but I got married. Obviously, that put a lot of pressure on time. A lot of different things going on, particularly even with church. There was a tricky season at church. Not a bad season or anything, but just a tricky season that demanded a lot of time and energy, plus getting married and the preparation for that. So I think the last podcast we posted might have been in December, maybe November. So really, things since January, February, March for me were very hectic. Just locking in times to do stuff when really we're just going to keep our heads above water was part of the issue, that we haven't really put out a lot more content than we originally indicated. So that's part of that reason. Plus, we've just been talking about some of the technical issues we've been having. I don't know, you can probably speak into this as much as I can, but it's actually quite hard. Like in lockdown, we had a lot of this gear set up in our churches. So we just go in and, for example, we did a lot of stuff at Miranda Kong down in the Shire. And all their stuff was just set up. We just go in there and do a podcast, piece of cake. Unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunate, but with the situation coming out of lockdown, it's been a lot harder for us to do that. So we actually have to be mindful of when we set up. Like, what do you think? Is that another reason?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think for both of us as well, and probably for many of our pastors in our churches too. Yeah. That long period of COVID, lockdowns. Many of us foregoed, vacation time. I know around January I took some much needed leave, and I was actually able to do a flying visit to family back in WA who I hadn't been able to see for 2 years. Yeah. But we're really excited about what these podcasts can do in the future, aren't we? And some of the topics that we're going to kind of touch on. So it's great to be back here in front of the cameras and to be talking about FCC things. So Tim, I feel like I'm driving this a bit because last time you asked me questions about myself.
It's true.
How did you become connected with congregational churches? Is this something from your childhood, or where do you first trace your connection with a Cong church? It's
a really interesting question. Like people, when I was studying at, I went to Sydney Missionary and Bible College in Croydon. People asked me that, and I was like, I just sort of. I don't mean this in a negative way, but my parents literally just sort of sent me to the church. I grew up at Miranda Kong. I grew up in Caringbah in the Shire, but that's the church my parents just sort of sent me to. So I went to the Sunday school and the kids club stuff there. We also did Cubs and Scouts when I was a kid at Miranda Kong. And I didn't really think about it. It's just like, I wouldn't have called myself a branded Congregationalist or anything. I was just a kid who went to youth group. That followed through high school. Me and my brothers got sent to. And then I think I became a Christian when I was about 21-ish, somewhere around there. But before that, I just sort of went because a lot of my friendship circle was there. A lot of people I knew. I was getting trained up and mentored by a few people at Miranda Kong, pastors who are no longer there. I'd love to say that I had a deep conviction to congregationalism and congregational church and all that sort of stuff, but I didn't. I just sort of went where my parents sent me. And that sort of went on, and I became more involved in leadership in my 20s in particular, and I started to lead the youth group. Plus, I started to do stuff in the wider fellowship at that time. So I'd always served in a thing called Easter Camp. which was kind of like a young adults / high school camp. And eventually I went on to direct Easter camp with another pastor at the church in England who I work with now, Lee Murray. So I guess I sort of just fell into it as the years went by. And I had new friends who went to Anglican churches in the Shire. I just went to a Cong church. And so, yeah, I grew up in the system. So I feel like I know a lot about the good things and the quirks of the FCC. Yep. But yeah, very much just sort of raised in the system. And that's the church my family sent me to when I was a kid. Yeah.
So a local congregational church, yep. A local gathering of Christian believers that brought you in through activities and their evangelistic endeavours, but also had that wonderful progression of training and identifying, and you're here today, both in ministry, director of ministry role, because of all of that. Yeah.
Well, that's a good story in itself. Like the first person to talk to me, he sadly passed away, but the first person to talk to me about going to Bible college or thinking about ministry was a guy called Ollie Peterson. And I would have been about 22, 23. And he pulled me aside and said, "Oh, come over for lunch." And I went over and had some rolls and stuff with he and his wife, Vicky. And they said, "Oh, you should go to Bible college and see where God leads you from there." And I'm like, "Are you serious?" I found it just crazy. Like I was really introverted. I had a lot of other stuff going on. I never saw myself as the upfront preacher / leader guy. I just didn't see that. And Ollie was like, "Yeah, well, fair enough, but see where life takes you, see where God leads you. You might go into pastoral ministry, you might find yourself in another role, but just see." And it actually took probably 6 or 7 years. And another guy, Andrew Harris, who now works at a church out in Victoria, he was another force within that, encouraging me to think about ministry vocationally. And they had to work on me over a number of years before I did that. But they also gave me a lot of opportunities. They trained me up, especially with preaching opportunities and leading opportunities, probably opportunities that maybe I wouldn't have got elsewhere. So yeah, very much. Who I am now in terms of ministry and stuff is very much a result of the Cong church, particularly in Miranda, resourcing me, training me up, visioning me, give me a place, give me responsibility, and eventually give me a job. So yeah, that's the way
I find that really fascinating. I mean, we've known each other for a number of years, but there are various different theologies of call to ministry, but just this idea of mature Christian believers identifying things inside of you or witnessing things that you're doing and saying, "Hey, would you press into this? Would you consider this?" So it took a while. It wasn't that lightning bolt call of ministry kind of thing.
No, I was horrified. I was like, "Oh my goodness, I want to run in the other direction." I really pushed against it.
A Jonah kind of.
Yeah, well, in one sense, like there's two streams of it, right? I always wanted to study. Yep. I always wanted to go to somewhere like SMBC. I always wanted to do that. But I didn't necessarily want to become a pastor at the end of it, which is a strange sort of thing, isn't it? Like, I was always a bit of a reluctant pastor. And yet when I did it, around a con when I was at SMBC, I went to SMBC when I was about 29. They gave me a student pastor's role about a day a week, and I did that, and I really enjoyed it. I did a lot of youth group stuff within that. And then more and more, particularly when the guy who I mentioned a second ago, Andrew, moved on about my second year, I had to take on a lot more responsibility, and suddenly I found myself almost in paid ministry, kind of accidentally. So yeah, I don't know how you'd articulate that in terms of call and all that sort of stuff, but as more things were given to me, I found myself growing to the task, might be a better way to phrase it.
And I've seen that growth in the time that I've known you. I came when you were towards the end of your college experience. Okay, yeah, remember you being a student up there at Pastors and Families Camp?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, kind of.
Away and talking to you about essays and things like that.
Okay, that's taking me back, but yeah, that's like nearly 10 years ago, Michael. But yeah.
Well, the time flies by.
We're getting old, aren't we? We're getting old.
But taking a step back, what did you do in your 20s? Like, what were you doing in terms of vocation? Did you do any other studies?
Again, I was a bit listless in my 20s. I'll be honest, it's probably not a time in my life I look back on heaps fondly in a lot of ways. I just didn't have a lot of direction. And so I did what's called a Bachelor of Arts. That's when you go to university, you don't know what you want to do. And out of that, and my parents are both teachers, they didn't push me, but they nudged me in that direction. Not in any unpleasant ways or anything like that. So I found myself teaching high school English, again, somewhat reluctantly at the start, but I grew into it and found myself, once I established myself at a school, really enjoying it. But there was always an ache. There was always a feeling in me that it wasn't something I wanted to do forever. And it was always something I was going to do for a season, get some life experience, maybe get a bit of money under my belt. But I never saw myself as a teacher until I was 60 or 70 or 80, as some people do. So, yeah. But if I had those times again, if I could go back in time and get a time machine, I probably would do something a little bit different with my life, particularly in that season. But I think I always would have gone to Bible college, funnily enough. So I think God was working in the situation, even in spite of that.
Now, here's something interesting, and it probably pushes more into like why we've had this kind of pause. But Sydney Missionary Bible College, like most Bible colleges, has a reputation for bridal college. Yeah, that's where people meet their spouse and things like that. Yeah. However, you went through college single. And
it's funny, I actually had some conversations along those lines. I sometimes think maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe that happened years ago. Yeah. In my time, I didn't see a lot of that. I saw some really negative experiences from friends and stuff. It's like a little bubble. I don't know about other seminaries and colleges and whatnot, but SMBC is like this little bubble. When things are good, it's great. When things get not so good, everyone sees everything. And I saw that happen.
It's been interesting, the kind of conversations that we've had over the years, talking about, we see people like Paul being single and him articulating. I don't think an idea that people need to be celibate to be in ministry, but I think actually something that's kind of even countercultural, that singleness can be something that is really good for ministry. I think of the many missionaries that I've seen over the years who are able to do things in singleness that a married couple would never be able to do.
Yeah, I think that's very much the case. So, I left SMBC and worked pretty much full-time at Miranda Cong. Again, they offered me the role. I was thinking of doing university ministry, but they said, we'd love you to stay on, so I did. I think my singleness gave me a lot of space there to work within that, and particularly with the young adults. There's a lot of flexibility. People would come over to I lived in a pretty humble apartment with another guy. People would just come over and have dinner. And so there was a life shape thing there that suited that. And I think I could speak into singleness quite well, and I did a bunch of talks and stuff on that as well. And even when I went to establish, I joined a church plant in the Cong network in Cronulla at the time, and there were some limitations, let's just put it that way, and sacrifices financially that if I was a married person with a mortgage and 3 kids, I maybe couldn't have done. And so it gave me let me use the word financial flexibility, that if I was married, that I probably couldn't have done. Because when you're single, you can eat Maggi noodles and live very simply if you need to for a season. And that's the reality of working at a church plant, unfortunately. So, but there's also been other things that singleness has enabled me to do. So I went to a pretty dodgy part of the world. I spent some time in Iraq. And a lot of people were saying, you're crazy, what are you doing? But in a very real sense, if the worst of the worst happened, and someone asked me at church actually, then I'm not leaving anyone behind. I'm not saying I'm not saying I'm suicidal or anything like that, no. But there is a sense in which, if the worst of the worst happens, then the consequences of that are very different for a single person than they are for someone who's married with kids. And Paul sort of alludes to that, their hearts and their minds are divided in 1 Corinthians 7. And people have written books and books about what he's saying there. But it's true, like your heart can be on certain things. You don't have to worry, my kids, what are they going to be like? What's their future like? What school do they have to go to? You're just not in that situation, so...
Yeah. The weight that I felt when I got married was that this idea that whatever decision I made, if it ended up me living in my car, I was quite happy to do that as a single bloke. I'm quite happy to throw the swag down on the ground and, rough it for whatever time or couch surfing. But when you've got somebody else in the family, it's a much harder decision to make.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I was happy to do those things, but I was able to do those
things.
Yeah.
So, as you mentioned, this last year and March saw you get married to Hope, and that's just been a wonderful thing to see. That
appreciate that, and thank you for all the well wishes we got from the FCC. That meant a lot to many, many people. So thank you so much.
And so you're now entering this new season of life and ministry as a couple, thinking about this is a bit of an impromptu kind of question, but you were talking about the benefits ministry-wise of being single. What are some of the things you've seen as you and Hope have come together? Because Hope's someone from a ministry background herself, isn't she?
Yeah. So she's been described to me as a ministry powerhouse, which she is. She's an incredibly gifted and capable woman in her own right. And so us navigating things as a couple, there's obviously challenges with that, don't get me wrong, it's not all rosy, and there's been some adjustments, particularly because we're both a bit older. I'm 41 now and she's about 30, maybe I shouldn't say mid-30s. But anyway, so there's certainly an adjustment. It's not like we're 20, you know, and you can just go with things. When you're a bit older, you have to get used to those things because you're used to different things. And so there's been challenges without a doubt. But in terms of ministry, it's been amazing seeing her come into our church context and say, oh, wow, what can I do to grow this? What can I do? How can I lean into this? What can I do to bring my own skills and background and training into growing ministry in our local church, which is established? So that's been awesome. And we even run a Bible study together. Seeing her really kind of shine in that has been really awesome. And also, she's also doing some other work for a Christian non-profit, and seeing her lean into that and think about that strategically. It's quite amazing seeing God's gifts grow and shine in someone. I just sort of sometimes watch from afar and look at how gifted she is and go, wow, that's really, really amazing. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but yeah, there's been, in many ways, I sometimes see my role as a husband to almost step out of her way and let her just do her thing, and hopefully enable that and give a framework for that as well. So
I think that's a beautiful Christological thing. I mean, no, I don't want to get too theological, but you know, when Paul talks about in Ephesians, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. I know it's sort of something that's you know, talked about. You know, is evangelical Christianity patriarchal and misogynist and things like that, but I think what you're articulating, and what I'd hope also would be articulated about Amanda and myself, is this idea of, we're not ones who are blockers for what's happening in our wives' lives. We want to take on that Christological role of being ones that enable them to blossom, to shine, to do that wonderful work.
Well, without a doubt. And I think I'm echoing a writer called Tim Keller, who some of us might be aware of. He's an American pastor. Unfortunately, he's getting to, is he retired now? I'm not sure. And anyway.
70s.
Anyway, Tim Keller wrote a book called The Meaning of Marriage, and he says one of the primary roles of a spouse is to ensure your other spouse, the spouse that you have, what am I trying to say? The primary role of a husband or a wife, let's use that language, is to enable your spouse to flourish. Yeah. And hopefully, I mean, we're still working a lot of this stuff out. We're new at this, but I'm really just looking at her and going, oh, how can I ensure her gifts shine, her gifts grow, also that I grow as well alongside her. One of the best things is she critiques my sermons. That's great. So she's doing that for me as well. But also, how can we enable her to grow and flourish and find a space within ministry, even if it's in the bigger context of the church. And when I say church, I mean obviously local church. But she's also interested in doing some stuff for the wider church. She's doing some training and counselling and Christian counselling, and she has a lot of insight into that as well. So, it's really exciting, mate. Hopefully.
Well, it sounds like a really good basis to start this new season of your life. In a couple of years, we'll call you up and get you to do some few marriage enrichment kind of talks.
We're experts already. I'm just kidding.
But I think that theological foundation is deeply important, and this idea of coming together in a way that you grow together in Christ is really important. Well, let's come back. You've been in the Director of Ministries role. I mean, we've rebranded, we've reshaped that to say that your role is more than just an administrative one. It's about the life of the FCC. The FCC means a great deal to you, as I've heard you talk both today. It's something that's been a big part of shaping who you are. And working alongside of you and seeing that enthusiasm come into the role has just been fantastic. What do you see as some of the things in your role as Director of Ministry that you're wanting to try and achieve?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I guess the General Secretary role has been largely defined as purely administrative, which isn't a bad thing, and there's certainly a need for that, and certainly is something a role within that needs to be achieved. But as I came up to the end of my 3-year kind of little period. I was signed on for 3 years. I don't know if that's the right word, but there was a verbal agreement that I'll be in the role for 3 years. And I'm like, my gifting is actually probably more in training and working with pastors and thinking in more of a strategic way. So that's probably where I'm sort of wired. And I'm like, I can stay in the General Secretary role, but actually if I stay in it, I probably want to be more leaning into these things as well as these things. And that's why we've done a bit of a restructure in terms of some of those roles. So there could have been a couple of different things. I could have moved on and someone else could take the General Secretary's role, but they were like, oh, we want you to keep you on. And I appreciate flexibility in ministry. I think that's something you were talking about as we were talking about this shift. Hopefully I'm answering your question, maybe I'm going on a tangent. And so we're like, oh, well, how can we get the best out of Tim, as well as making sure we're covering these other bases? And so that's why we've sort of branded it in terms of the Director of Ministries. There's more to be said about that. We can chat about that another time, or you can ask me questions about it. You can drop into the office. Have I answered that well for at least that part of it?
Yeah, I think you've given us a good basis, and certainly I think that whole future vision and direction of the FCC will not just be one podcast, but future podcasts. I suppose we, as a fellowship of churches, want to be praying for the wider ministry. What are one or two prayer points you would say in your role as Director of Ministries? What could we be praying about for you?
I'm going to give two things. One is just, we keep, me and my wife Hope, keep growing in our ability to be married, because there are challenges and struggles, and not horrible things or anything like that, but just things that we need to keep wrestling with, that we keep serving the other and loving the other and trying to understand where the other's at in terms of just life. That we keep growing in that, because there's always an adjustment. I think that's an adjustment for any couple, by the way, but particularly for us. So keep praying for us, just our marriage, that we keep striving to be godly in that sense. But also, within the greater fellowship, pray for a clarity of where we want to go, and even a boldness to push some of those things through with yourself and with a few other people. That I think some big things are coming up in the life of the FCC, and we can talk about that another time, as Michael said. But that we can be super clear on what we see things going, that we can present that to the denomination when the time's appropriate, and that God gives it sails and gives it wings for it to sail as well. So that's, I'm being a bit vague there, but hopefully we can talk about that in the future as well. So clarity in terms of where we're going for a denomination, but also just, for us as a couple as well, me and Hope.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Well, thanks, Tim, for coming out to Revesby today, and looking forward to being able to talk more about ministry and the life of the FCC as we continue on with our podcast season. So from Tim and I, we'll see you next time. Thanks, then.